Hey everyone, welcome. I am absolutely thrilled you're tuning in for this explainer today. We are unpacking a seriously fascinating concept from Class 9 science, tissues. We're going to look at exactly how biological cells organize themselves to get massive amounts of work done with, frankly, incredible efficiency. If you've ever stopped to wonder how a tree can stand completely straight for decades, or how your own body seamlessly manages thousands of processes at the exact same time, well, you are in the right place.
So let's jump right in by thinking about something called the division of labor. Imagine a single-celled organism for a second, like an amoeba. That amoeba is basically like a solo content creator on the internet. It has to do absolutely everything itself, right? It has to film, edit, publish, market. In biological terms, it handles its own nutrition, respiration, and excretion. And honestly, it's exhausting. But multicellular organisms, like you, me, and the plants outside, we're more like massive multinational corporations. We divide the workload. Instead of one cell desperately trying to do everything, we have specialized groups of cells that just focus on one single job. This dramatically reduces the individual workload and makes the whole operation incredibly efficient.
So, what exactly is a tissue? Formally speaking, it's a group of structurally similar cells working together to perform a very specific function. Oh, and just a quick note for you. The actual scientific study of these tissues is called histology. You can think of it like an organizational hierarchy. Letters make up words, words make up sentences, and sentences make paragraphs. In biology, individual cells combine to form tissues. Tissues group together to form organs, like your heart or a leaf, and organs form organ systems. Because of this brilliant division of labor, no single cell ever gets overwhelmed.
Okay, here is the quick map for our corporate tour today. First, plant versus animal needs. Second, meristematic tissues. Third, simple permanent tissues. Fourth, complex permanent tissues. And finally, protective and epithelial tissues. Let's kick things off with Section 1, plant versus animal needs.
Have you ever wondered why a plant's corporate structure looks so totally different from an animal's? Well, it all comes down to lifestyle. Plants are stationary. Because they don't move around and have to stand firmly upright against the wind and gravity, they actually rely heavily on dead tissue. And dead tissue is fantastic for rigid support. Animals, on the other hand, are mobile. Because we are constantly moving, hunting, and burning energy, our bodies rely heavily on living tissues to fuel and support all that high-energy movement.
Moving right along to Section 2, meristematic tissues, also known as the growing tissues.
Welcome to the plant's expansion and growth department. Meristematic tissues are highly active dividing cells. Honestly, their sole purpose in life is just to multiply. In fact, they even lack food-storing vacuoles because they're too busy dividing to store anything. There are three main types here. First up, the apical meristem, found at the tips of roots and shoots, which is responsible for height. Second, we have the lateral meristem, on the sides of the stem, increasing girth. Actually, fun fact, this is what creates a tree's annual rings. And third, the intercalary meristem, located at the nodes, driving the growth of new branches.
And you know, this brilliantly illustrates a phenomenon you've definitely seen in your own backyard. Why does grass grow back so fast after you mow it or after a cow grazes on it? You literally just chopped off the apical meristem at the tip, right? Well, the grass survives and regrows because of those intercalary meristems located lower down at the nodes. They act as this built-in backup growth engine, sprouting entirely new blades and branches. All right, Section 3, simple permanent tissues. This is all about structural support.
Eventually, those dividing meristem cells have to take on a permanent job through a process called differentiation. And that brings us to the manufacturing and structural support department. If we look at the chemical breakdown here, we see three distinct variations of simple permanent tissues. Parenchyma are living cells with thin walls used for storage. Collenchyma are also living, but they're thickened with this rubbery chemical called pectin. This is what allows plant stems to bend gracefully in the wind without snapping. Finally, we have sclerenchyma. These are dead cells, thickly coated in a cement-like substance called lignin, providing immense, unyielding strength. To really put this into perspective, think about the food you eat. When you try to rip the hard husk off a coconut, you are literally fighting against heavily lignified sclerenchyma cells. Or when you bite into a pear or a guava and you feel that distinct kind of gritty crunch, yep, that's sclerenchyma too. On the flip side, if you've ever seen a water hyacinth floating beautifully on a pond, it's utilizing a highly specialized type of parenchyma called erenchyma. These cells have large air cavities that act like tiny built-in life preservers to provide buoyancy.
Next up, Section 4, complex permanent tissues.
the logistics and transport layer.
So now that the structure is built, we have to move supplies around. The plant's logistics network relies on two main highways. The xylem is the plumbing system, transporting water up from the roots. It's a one-way upward street made mostly of really strong dead cells acting as high-pressure pipes. Then we have the phloem, the food highway. It transports sugars from the leaves to the rest of the plant. And because food needs to go absolutely everywhere, the phloem is bidirectional, and it's made mostly of living cells. I've got to say, the phloem team is a total masterpiece of cellular cooperation. The actual transport pipes are called sieve tubes. They have perforated plates, kind of like tiny strainers, between them to let food pass through. But here is the crazy part. Sieve tubes absolutely do not have a nucleus. No way, right? So how do they even survive? Well, they rely entirely on their neighbors, the companion cells. These act as the managers. They literally control the cellular functions of the sieve tubes, actively loading the food shipments into the tubes up in the leaves and unloading them way down in the roots.
Finally, Section 5, Protective and Animal Tissues, the Security Department.
Every organism, plant or animal, needs a barrier against the outside world. For plants, this ultimate outer barrier is the epidermis. On the parts of the plant above ground, it secretes a waterproof, waxy cuticle to lock in moisture against the hot sun. But brilliantly, the roots completely skip this waxy layer. Think about it. If roots were waterproof, they couldn't absorb any water. Instead, root cells grow extensions to maximize their surface area for water absorption. Of course, a plant can't be completely sealed off. It has to breathe. That's where stomata come in. These are tiny pores embedded right in the leaf's epidermis, acting as secure, highly controlled doors. They are flanked by two kidney-shaped guard cells that open and close the pore. This lets carbon dioxide enter for photosynthesis, but it also allows water vapor to escape, a process called transpiration. Now, this water loss isn't a mistake. It actually creates a suction pull, literally exactly like sucking liquid up a straw, and that is the exact force that pulls water up the dead pipes of the xylem all the way from the roots. Okay, so plants have engineered this absolutely incredible system of dead wood, wax, and water pressure to survive while staying in exactly one place. But what happens to creatures that run and jump and scrape their knees? What protects us? Well, the animal equivalent to that protective layer is epithelial tissue. Because we move around and interact pretty violently with our environment, our security layer has to be incredibly robust. Epithelial tissue forms your skin, for sure, but it also tightly lines your internal organs. Now, animals also rely on totally different systems to function and move, like muscular, connective, and nervous tissues. But those tightly packed epithelial cells serve as the ultimate unbroken physical barrier that keeps all those inner systems totally safe and neatly separated. So we've seen how cells differentiate and group together to form a highly specialized division of labor, from the actively growing meristems to the rigid sclerenchyma to the complex logistics of xylem and phloem, and finally the tight security of the epidermis and epithelial tissues. But man, it begs such an amazing question. If a single tissue is just one isolated department, how do all these vastly different systems communicate and synchronize to keep the entire biological corporation alive and thriving? Well, that deep dive into organ systems and high-level biological management is a fantastic topic for another day. I really hope this explainer has completely changed how you look at the plants outside your window and even the very skin on your own hands. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.